to the entertaining Talkin' Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, I'm going to evaluate the current roster going forward. Players that I think will be on the roster next year, and who could help us and where we need a lot of improvements. And I'm going to identify which areas I think need more improvement than others for this team to be a competitive football team in the 2020 season. Now, before I get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to Sean Grimes, one of my best subscribers. He actually gave me this idea in one of my previous videos. Thought it was a great idea, so thank you, Sean. He said, I think you should do a position-by-position overview of the 2020 Giants and whether you think they are a starter on a championship-level team or we need a replacement. So that's what I'm going to do, and we're going to jump right into the video. Now, before I say which players we need, I need to know the defensive scheme. But based off the assumption that we're probably going to stick with the 3-4, we could certainly shift to the 4-3. I'll give my evaluation on both the defense and the offense. We also don't know who our head coach is right now. There's reports on both sides of whether or not Pat Shurmur is going to stay, and we're going to get that information on Monday. But regardless, a lot of the players on the current roster will be on the 2020 roster. We have a lot of young rookies who don't make a lot of money. We don't know their exact roles next year, but we're going to have to wait and see. But I will start with the offense. I'm going to start with the quarterback position, the most important position on a football team. And next year, obviously, you hope and think that Daniel Jones will take a big step forward. Daniel Jones has shown strides this year. Yes, I always say it needs to work on his pocket awareness, but he's certainly going to be the quarterback going forward. And based on how he played last week, it's a lot of encouraging things, and hopefully he has something to build off of after the Eagles game. Now, I think the Giants could certainly look to acquire a backup quarterback with some experience. I didn't really go down the list, but I'll get, much deeper into free agent talk in the offseason. And one of the things I will talk about is the backup quarterback. I think it's important for a young quarterback like Daniel Jones to go out there and bring in a guy who's been around the league. I'm not too sure of his contract details right now, but Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think, is a perfect example. It's a guy I've brought up. It's a guy who's been in the league for like 15, 16 years. He wouldn't pose a threat to take over Daniel Jones' job, and he'd be able to provide him with information, much like the Jets did early on, bringing in a Mark Brunell, who was a savvy veteran for Mark Sanchez to learn under. I think the Giants could look to go that route at the backup quarterback position. Running back. Obviously, we all know who our guy is, right? The horse, Saquon Barkley, who, again, very encouraged by the way he's played down the stretch. He's dealt with some injuries this year. He's dealt with a rookie quarterback, learning the playbook. But Barkley looks to be back to himself, and I think he's in for an incredibly strong 2020 season. Now, if I'm going to nitpick, one thing that I have said that I think the New York Giants need to work on at the running back position coming into this season and going into 2020, they need to establish a solid backup, a guy that you are confident can go in there and pick up short yardage. They have not been able to do that with a Wayne Gallman. He's had fumbling issues, has not been consistent. Maybe he will be that guy next year. If not, they may want to look at drafting a running back late in the draft, 5th, 6th round pick, much like they did with a Brandon Jacobs, who worked out to be a great short yardage back for the New York Giants. But they could certainly use that. But obviously, Barkley's going to be the guy that gets the majority of the touches. But you always want to have a solid backup who could spell Barkley, in certain situations. Next up, we're going to talk about the wide receiver position. Wide receiver, the New York Giants invested a lot. Obviously, they traded away Odell Beckham, but they spent a good amount of money on Golden Tate on a 4-year deal. I expect him to be back next year. They could cut him the following year if they choose to, depending on what they do in this draft and next year's draft, if they do attack the wide receiver market in the draft. I don't see any free agent wide receivers who make any sense for the Giants this year, like a Burris did back in Eli's second year. There's not a gifted young receiver in this year's core that I'd be willing to spend a lot of money on. I think they're going to go with what they got unless they draft an impact wide receiver in the draft, which is possible. They could take a Judy. They could take someone like that. But on the current roster right now, Golden Tate has shown good chemistry with Daniel Jones when he's been on the field. Of course, he was suspended. Darius Slayton has been, the gem of the class. He's got 700 receiving yards thereabouts with 8 touchdowns. So he's been great and definitely could be a bright piece going forward. The one thing this group lacks, and I'll include the tight ends in this, Evan Ingram, I probably think will be back. I made a video on him yesterday that I would shop him around if the right offer came about, but you're probably not going to get a late second-round pick for him based on his injury history. You could. I wouldn't rule it out, but I'm not going to expect it. He's another weapon, and of course, Sterling Shepard. The weapons on this offense are not that bad. I'd say they're probably about average. Yes, they could use a big-time weapon like a Beckham. They don't have that, but they have a lot of good weapons, and if they improve the offensive line, which is the real problem for this offense, and some of that could be attributed to a rookie quarterback, as he gets better reading coverage. I think that'll help the offensive line a bit. But That's the main problem. I think the receivers are solid. They don't create unbelievable separation. They don't have a big game breaker, but they're pretty solid. And like I said, I'm not going to be upset if they draft a Judy early or a CeeDee Lamb or whatever, but it wouldn't be my number one option. The offensive line, right now, if you look at this roster, Will Hernandez is coming back. Second-round pick a couple of years ago. He's coming back. He's had a little bit of a dip this year in production, but hopefully he could take a step forward next year. I think Solder will be back. They could cut Solder, but it's going to cost you $13 million to cut him, where his contract's $19 million. I don't think it makes much financial sense. The rest of the guys, Halapio, I think, should be replaced. Remmers should be replaced, and Zeitler will be back. So I think 3 out of the 5 linemen will be back next year in the starting lineup. Now, there's certainly some guys on the bench, whether it be a Gates, whether it be a Pulley, who I think are really good depth pieces for this offensive line. But I don't know if they'll be starting next year. I expect the other 3 to start. They could attack the center in the draft. Maybe they could elect to move one of their guys off the bench, like a Pulley, into the starting center spot. I suppose it's possible. There's not a lot of good centers in the free agency market if you look at it. There's just not. The tackle, there is more talent, but we'll see if Conklin even hits the open market, and he's coming off an ACL injury. We'll see if the Giants want to dive into that. But usually, most teams do not let top-tier offensive linemen hit the market, which is why you usually overpay like the Giants did for Nate Solder, because he was the best guy out there, and he was an average to a slightly above average offensive tackle that got paid top-tier money because the best tackles don't hit the market. It's really more prudent and smart, in my opinion, to attack the offensive line via the draft. And we'll see what the Giants do. Like I said, they could go first, second, third round, whatever they decide to do. But they certainly need to get younger with this unit. I do think some of the failures, as I've said earlier on in this video, has to do with Daniel Jones. I don't think Daniel Jones was ready to read coverages. He's a rookie quarterback. You expect that. And if you remember correctly, the offensive line played very well the first 2 weeks with Eli under center. Then Barkley goes down. They become a more predictable offense. Daniel Jones having trouble reading coverages. Last week was very encouraging. The O-line looked great. I'm not saying I expect that next year, but I do think there'll be a better unit with a more developed quarterback and more experience together. But they definitely need to add at least a piece, if not 2, to that line. If they want to have a solid unit going into next season, it's something they really need to focus on. Being that they expect to build their team around Saquon Barkley, you need run blocking and you want to protect your second-year quarterback. Next thing we're going to talk about is the defensive line. To me, this is by far the biggest strength on this roster. It just is. Matter of fact, if they were looking to trade a player, this would probably be the most logical area, especially if they bring back a Leonard Williams, which most people expect them to do. Because you look here, you got Leonard Williams, who is a very good player. He doesn't get sacks, but he gets great pressure. You've got Dexter Lawrence, who's one of the best rookies in football this year. You got B.J. Hill, who's hit or miss, but his PFF grade suggests he's done a good job in the limited time that he's gotten, collapsing the pocket, filling the run holes. Dalvin Tomlinson, to me, has been our most consistent player on the defense all year. And R.J. McIntosh has a few sacks, too, in the limited time that he's gotten. So if the Giants were to trade a player on this team, it may make sense to trade a defensive tackle. Not sure which one you would pick. Tomlinson would probably get you the most value, being that he's not going to cost a lot, and he's been very productive this year. I love Dalvin Tomlinson, but he may make the most sense. You're not trading a Dexter Lawrence. Tomlinson would hold the most value if you look to trade one, but regardless, this unit is a very strong unit for this defense, and it's what I think they're going to build the defense around going forward. Now, where they need a lot of help, and it's probably their biggest need, and this area they could potentially fill in free agency, if an Ngakoue becomes available, if a Shaq Barrett becomes available, if a Jadeveon Clowney becomes available, it's much more likely that a very good edge rusher hits the open market than an offensive lineman, and they're going to get paid. I mean, right now, Shaq Barrett's projected financials, according to Sport Track, is going to be around $16 million a year. I think he could even make more than that, because I remember last year, Zadarius Smith was projected around $8 or $9 million. He got bank. And so you're probably going to, if you want to get a high-impact edge rusher, you're probably spending $20 million of your projected $70 million in cap space or so, and that's if you do not bring back a Marcus Golden. Golden was nice to see, got his bonus. He deserves it. He's got 10 sacks on the year, and I think he's going to try to get paid, as he should. He's had 2 major injuries, and if the Giants stay in the 3-4, they could certainly elect to bring him back, but they could still bring in another edge rusher. That's certainly been a problem. O'Shane Ximines, who's a somewhat promising rookie, is second on the team in sacks with 4.5. Team has to get a lot more pressure on the quarterback if they want to be a more productive defense next year, especially being that they have a young secondary. Can't ask those guys to cover forever. Next spot we're going to look at is the middle linebacker position, and the man shown there is Alec Ogletree. I expect him to be cut. which would leave this unit with really no experience. So the Giants could certainly elect to go out there, add a Littleton if they stay in the 3-4 if he's available, add a Joe Schobert. There's certainly names in free agency they could attack at the middle linebacker position. They could do that for sure. They could also elect to draft a middle linebacker early in the draft. A Simmons if you think he could play it. There's a lot of ways they could go here at the linebacker position. But I think Ogletree will be cut due to the fact that he's going to save you $9 million, and he's been underwhelming since he's been here. It's been one of Gettleman's bad moves. And I don't think you're going to be able to get anything for him. The Giants gave up a 5th-round pick to get him here to begin with. I don't expect you're going to get much for him. I think it'll be a clear cut. Maybe you get a 7th-round pick. I don't think you're going to get much for him. But, yeah, obviously Conley, we all hope will be back, and he definitely displayed some, good traits, and maybe he could be a guy in the middle. David Mayo's played very good against the run, but struggles mightily in pass coverage. This is probably the biggest hole in the defense. I wouldn't say it's the most important. I think edge rusher is the most important, and they need some experience in that secondary, which we're going to get to in a minute. But, yeah, they certainly could use a guy in the middle with some experience or draft one early on in the draft who's a high-impact guy. And then finally, we're going to get to the secondary. Secondary, you could go out and you could add a Byron Jones. He's one of the bigger names on the free agency market at the cornerback position. He's going to cost a lot, though, and he's, kind of regressed a bit this year. That's what happens when you sign guys in free agency. They're usually past their prime or about, approaching the tail end of their prime. So that's what you got to worry about. But they could use, again, much like the middle linebacker position, they've got all young kids back there. I mean, DeAndre Baker, Sam Beal, Corey Ballantyne, Julian Love, Jabril Peppers. They're all very young. I expect them to cut Bethea. He doesn't carry a dead cap hit next year. And yeah, for sure, Peppers will be slotted in at one of the safety spots. I expect Baker to be one of the starting corners. As far as the others go, Julian Love could start at safety. He could start at the slot, but I don't think he's guaranteed a position. Corey Ballantyne, I think, would be better served as a depth piece. He was a 6th-round pick for a reason. He's a good special teamer and probably a good guy to come off the bench. And Sam Beal, we don't know what we got yet. He's a guy that, has talent, but he hasn't been able to stay on the field, and he's been hit or miss when he's been on it. So a lot of question marks in that secondary. They could add a Byron Jones, like I said, or maybe somebody else via free agency, or they could draft an Okudah early in the draft. There's a lot of ways they could go with this first-round pick, and that's what makes it so interesting having the 4th overall selection. But yeah, as far as the defense goes, you need at least 1, if not 2, new pieces in that secondary. You need at least 1 middle linebacker if you want to compete. Like I said, the D-line I think is pretty stout. Maybe they could trade up east to get a draft pick or to get somebody else in there, at another position in the defense. And the edge rusher, you need at least one guy, one dominant guy, I think, to have a strong defense next year or a much improved defense. So you're looking at 3 or 4 impact pieces, whether it come from free agency or the draft next year, for this team to be impactful. But there are some nice, bright young pieces in the defense, be it a Dexter Lawrence, be it a Dalvin Tomlinson or Leonard Williams if they retain his services. You hope that some of the other guys like Jimenez or Lorenzo Carter take a step forward. And yeah, we'll see what we got from there. Obviously, the secondary, DeAndre Baker, could certainly get better next year. But that's my roster breakdown. In terms of what's most important, in my opinion, it's got to be either the tackle position or the edge rusher. Those are definitely the 2 most important areas of need that need to be improved on going into 2020, being that you want to protect your quarterback, and getting a dominant pass rusher will certainly help all the other aspects of the defense. Because when the quarterback has less time to throw, or when you need to focus more on one individual player, and the Giants don't really have that guy right now, it takes away blockers from the other pass rushers, and it makes them better. So that's one thing that they definitely need on this defense, whether it be free agency or the draft, and we'll see what the Giants decide to go out and do. But yeah, those would be my 2 biggest areas of need. Then some experience there at the middle linebacker position, at the cornerback. I think that's what you're looking at, and maybe this team with a more experienced Daniel Jones and seeing what they do with the coaching decision could be much improved next year. You look at the 49ers this year, they went from worst to a potential Super Bowl threat. Not saying I expect that, but the Giants could certainly be a much better team next year with the cap space they have, with the encouraging signs we've seen from this year's rookie class, and, we'll see what they do with the coach. But as always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.